So as promised, I'm going to demonstrate for you the next step in turning these little vestigial heads that we made in class into a more complete sculpture. First thing I'm going to do is draw in the jawline for the piece, jawline and kind of the back of the skull. Then I'm going to flip the piece over and cut away the excess clay at the back of the neck, leaving just the jawline and the skull in place. Your clay should be stiff enough that it shouldn't fall apart. I'm actually going to use a little piece that I cut off to fill in the area under the chin. As always, when we join multiple pieces of clay, I'm going to score and slip. So score both pieces. And then I have a little container of slip that I'll fill into the score marks on both sides. And then place it on here and press together. I just go ahead and fill in the chin at this point because the head is already turned upside down, and it gives an area that the neck can eventually hold on to. You'll see I use one of my tools, in this case the wooden shaping tool, to press those two pieces together and smooth out the joint a little bit. I'm going to turn the head on its side so I can get in and use the tool to seal the interior joints. Sometimes you might have to add a little bit of clay in there. And then I can shape it a little bit more if I want to, smooth it out with a tool. I can also put my fingers on the inside and push out, just like we did for shaping the face, to give a little bit more roundness to the base of that chin. Most people have a little bit of a roundness underneath their chin. It's not perfectly a right angle under there. Okay, once I get it shaped like I want, take a look at how it looks, and then I'm ready to start building the neck. So I'm going to go ahead and set the head aside, and I've got a slab rolled out, which I'm going to test. Now, the drawing that I'm doing is the one with the creepy grin and the sort of skinny neck, so I'm going to spend some time figuring out how tightly I need to wrap this over in order for it to have that skinny look. I want to have it rolled over to its skinniest point because I'm going to flare out the top and bottom. If you're doing just a regular size neck, something that is proportional to the head, you'll want a slab that's about 14 inches long, maybe 6 inches tall. But mine is a little bit shorter and a little bit taller because, again, I have this long skinny neck in my reference drawing that I'm recreating. So as always, I'm scoring and slipping on the sides that come together. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could score this fast in real life without video magic to make it happen? Okay, and then I press together, just kind of pinch first with my fingers, and I'll flare out the top a little bit, so I'm just joining in the middle and leaving the top and bottom open a little bit because I'm going to flare those out so that they can become that kind of form that's in my drawing, and also so there's a place for my head to be attached to. I'm sealing these joints inside and outside with a tool. Remember, part of your grade for Project 3 is, did you construct this solidly? And this scoring and slipping and pressuring and smoothing, that is all part of that. Once I get everything put together, I'm going to put a little slit in the top here so that I can flare out that top. Again, we don't have the drawing on the screen, but my original drawing that I'm basing it on has kind of a cylinder that flares at the top and bottom, kind of stylistically. So again, I just make that slit and flare that out a little bit. Now that I've got it flared out how I want, I'm going to put some clay in those gaps to strengthen them. But instead of putting another slab in, I'm just going to roll out rather, kind of a fat little coil, sort of like the egg roll or the, you know what else I called it in class, that you see sitting on the rolly table here. I'm going to score and slip around the outside of each one of these openings and on the fat coil here. Put some slip in each one of them. And then I'm going to press the fat coil over the surface and kind of push it through. So I'm joining it on the outside, I'm pushing it through the center. Where it squishes out on the inside, I'm going to use the tool to smooth it out. So it's really being joined in multiple places to make a nice kind of strong patch. You could cut a slab that exactly fit this opening and score and slip that in there, but I find it easier personally to do it this way, especially since the clay I'm using for the quill came right out of the bag, so it's nice and soft and it's easy to shape in place. Clean up the bottom there a little bit. And again, I'm working from both the outside and the inside. I'm going to trim off this little extra bit from where I flared that out. Okay. And then, again, just checking to make sure everything is solid. Okay, look at it from all ways around. And then I'm going to test it. Does this look about right for how I want it to be with my head? I'll line the head up with the top where I think I want it to be. And I can score and slip that surface once again. I'm going to go ahead and strengthen this edge up a little bit because it's a little thin and there's kind of a crack there. So I've scored and slipped and am just putting a patch of clay. Whenever you have something that's got a fair amount of weight on it, you can go a little thicker than that 1/4 inch slab that we've been working with, just to give it a little bit more resilience to bending. Most of you all will be putting the neck straight on, but this is kind of an odd sculpture. The head is tilted way back, so I'm going to have to kind of put it out on a funny angle, like so, and it's going to have to hold itself there. And so I want to make sure that it's strong enough to do that. Go ahead and patch the other little place where we flared it out. Same thing, I'm scoring and slipping all around on the inside flanges of those slabs, on the outside, on the little fat coil that I'm rolling out, scoring and slipping, scoring once again. And then once it's all slipped, I'm going to put it in there and press it through. So again, there's new clay that's joining on the outside of the slab, new clay on the inside, new clay in between. Smoothing it out with a tool. A tool has much more pressure per square inch on it, and it will just make things kind of hold together a little bit better. Now, usually I would probably want to wait a little bit before I put this head on, just to let that set up what I just did. But hey, for the purposes of this demo, I want to keep moving. So you see I make some marks where the head joins the neck. I score that section of the head on both sides, right along that jawline I made. Put some slip in there. Oh, you all are going to be so tired of scoring and slipping by the end of this, but it really is a clay clay artist's best friend. It helps things hold together so much better. Okay, and then I'm going to score and slip what I'm joining it to, always both surfaces. Place it on there, and then I'm going to pinch together and start to smooth those joints together. This is a little bit tenuous right now because that clay I put in the neck is pretty wet, so I'm trying not to push down on the head or really tweak it to one side or another. I can try to tilt it back and get on the inside or underneath, but I have to be pretty gentle so that the piece doesn't collapse on itself. Remember what I said about clay having a certain point past which it doesn't really want to work with you, so you need to listen to what it's telling you through your hands. And I know many of you may not have experienced clay a whole lot, but if it seems like it's really starting to flop or wanting to collapse, be very careful. Okay, so I've got the neck joined on. Now I'm going to deal with these kind of gaps here where the shape of the neck that I built isn't exactly the same as the shape of the jawline. And I'm just going to have kind of a smooth transition going up there. Jawlines usually stick out a little ways from the neck, so if you're doing something that's pretty realistic in this area, you might want to have the neck go up and there be a little bit of a right angle, kind of like there is underneath the chin. But for me, because this is sort of a stylized thing, and it has kind of a smooth, almost like nuclear power plant shape that goes up into the head. I'm not worried so much about that realistic transition between one and the other. So you'll see, just like before, I kind of patted out a little a coil into sort of a little slab, and then I scored and slipped all around, filled it into the hole, got one little hole left, pushing from the outside in the inside to make sure it's really sealed on there. And I'm only going to show you this on one side. You can imagine that the same thing is done on the other side of the jawline at all as well. Smooth that out with my rib tool. Work on the inside of the neck to make sure things are smooth. Again, I'm being kind of gentle here because I don't want to just rip that neck off or have it keel completely over because it's a little soft right now. All right, that's looking pretty good. Turn it around from all angles just to see. And then once I'm pretty sure of it, I can gently turn it over. I, again, would recommend letting that dry a little bit before you flip it over, but if you've done your construction well, it should be pretty sturdy. So now we have our ghost-like face standing on its neck. I'm going to change the shape of this neck just a little bit because, again, I want that nice sort of smooth power, nuclear power plant like ski hill slope, however you want to conceive that ramp going down from the neck. So I'm just scoring and slipping and putting a little patch on there. Now that, of course, will make the slab in this area slightly thicker, but it's not a big deal. You know, ours is a primarily hollow sculpture, so if you have some areas that are a little thicker or a little thinner than 1/4 of an inch, not a big deal. So you see we've got it all smoothed out here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is start refining some of the features of this face. I normally start with the nose because it's kind of a key point in terms of how far things come out in space. So you see me scoring and slipping over that little baby nose that we built. And then I just rolled out a little ball of clay and I'm scoring and slipping the end, and I'm just going to put the ball on the end of the nose. It's going to look strange at first, kind of like a little clown nose. But you generally have more success when you're sculpting human faces if you start with geometry. So you don't try to make it look like a nose at first. You use simpler shapes and then you refine from there. So I've got the ball on the end of the nose, and then I'm going to take another little coil, score and slip, and fill in so that we have a softer transition. Okay, so just shaping it out a little bit. You'll see the creepy pictures of my head back there on the computer, so I'm sort of looking at those too to get um, an idea of how this should look. You maybe noticed that I took 2 additional small balls of clay, put them on either side of the nose to make those, what were we calling them last week, nostril hoods. And then I sort of press my thumbs into the bottom to make almost a diamond shape on the bottom of the nose where that center split is. Now that I've got the nose in place, I feel like there's not quite enough room on the bottom of the face because this piece has this big old creepy grin on it. So I need to have a little bit more territory down there. So I'm going to alter my proportions to have more space on the bottom of the face. So I'm just scoring and slipping in here. I'm also taking this opportunity to re-wet the clay as a whole. You want to make sure that your clay head isn't drying out, especially any place that there's an edge that's coming in contact with the air. Then I'm going to add a patch onto the bottom of the chin, so to bring that down a little bit and make enough room for the mouth to go in there. A lot of pressure here to make sure it stays on. And then once I'm sure it's on, I can start shaping it. Chins also are essentially kind of a ball that sits, you know, in the front of the jawline, and then it's smoothed out as it goes back towards the jawline. So starting with geometry is a lot easier than saying I'm going to make the perfect chin. Now I'm ready to put the mouth on. So I kind of drew in where I wanted the mouth more or less to be, and now you see me scoring and slipping the upper lip, rolling out a long coil, score and slip that coil, And then I'm going to lay that about where I want my top lip to be. Now, obviously, that's bananas. It looks like, weirdly, kind of looks like Freddie Mercury right now, but it looks like this figure has a mustache. But you'll see I'm using my fingers um, to make that transition more subtle and to smooth it out and shape it where I want to go. Mouths are one of the more difficult things to sculpt and have them come out feeling relatively naturalistic. So as you're doing your sculpture, if you need some help getting the mouth or the lips to look like you want them to, there's plenty of time for me to come over and give you some advice one-on-one. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom lip. I'm going to score that out, slip it, and then fit this little coil that I've rolled out in there. So now it just looks like a Botox disaster. I think we talked at least some of the sections last time about not being too perfectionistic with this, that this is going to change. So it's about building from general to specific. So you see I'm refining out these lips a little bit, getting them a little more realistic isn't the right word because this is a distorted proportion, but a little bit more believable. But it's something that takes some time to work out, and I will continue to fool with it, I'm sure, as I work more on this sculpture. So you see I'm sort of shaping that divot in the chin underneath the lips using a tool to help. Now, because this is a very toothy grinned sculpture, I'm going to fill in a little mass that will eventually become the teeth. I'm not really going to differentiate the teeth right now. I just want them to stick out in space as much as they would for something like this. You know, I might draw them in just to get an idea of how big this is, but then I'm going to smooth it out because I'm going to wait for this clay to set up a little bit before I go in there, and then I will carve out the teeth a bit more. You can carve away stuff, although this is primarily an additive sculpture. You can do that in places. So now that I've got the mouth in, I'm going to build up the cheeks a little bit. Actually, I'm just going to do this on one side, and then you can imagine me repeating it on the other just to save you some time in watching this. But as always, scored and slipped, and again, the cheeks are essentially sort of rounded forms, half circles. And then I'm going to put some eyes in here. So the first thing I do usually for the eyes is I kind of draw them in where I want them to go. Then I'm going to score and slip in there, and I'm going to roll out a little ball of clay and just stick that ball on there for the eyeball. So again, all about geometry. Round for the cheeks, round for the chin, round for the end of the nose. If you can start there, it's a lot simpler than starting from a point of perfect realism. Then I roll out a little coil, and I'm going to wrap that coil over the top of the eye. This is going to be the top eyelid. See me smooth it into the ridge underneath the eye there. To get an eyelid to really look great, it can take some shaping. I'm going to dig out the sort of joint where it goes back into the head a little bit to get a bit more of a crisp transition, using a tool for that. Then I'm going to do the same thing with a smaller coil for the underlid, pushing it in there and then using a tool to help shape it. Sometimes I find when I put the eyelids on, you always want the top eyelid, at least in a standard proportion eye, to sort of overlap the lower eyelid. But sometimes you have to kind of get back in there and shore things up a little bit. I could put the lower lid on first, but I find the upper lid easier to see. And now you notice I'm putting a little bit more in on top of the eyeball because it felt like my eyeball was back down in there a little bit too far. I've actually thought about with this sculpture about just cutting the eyes out and having them be hollow, but we'll start here. I can always make that decision later if I want to. So I packed a little more clay in there, and I'm using just a touch of water, kind of smooth those areas out. And now that I've got the eye and I can see that the forehead is just a little too round, we want the brow ridge to come out just a little bit more. Not making a 5 head, just giving it a little bit more structure because where your eyebrow is a pretty definite overhang. So score and slip and pack a little clay on there. And as always, you'll see me sort of pushing it on there, smoothing it out. With all of these things right now, I'm not worrying about getting them perfectly smooth, and at this stage you shouldn't necessarily. You want to get your main forms established, and then you want to work all over the face, because if you get a perfect eyeball, for example, then you do the rest of the face and it's not great, then you have to come back and redo that, digging out the nostril. That's always a satisfying thing. So anyway, don't be afraid to leave it a little bit rough at this stage. We can always come back and refine it. And I'm just going to show you how to do an ear. My original design didn't actually have ears on it, but ears are complicated forms, but they're actually fairly easy to do with the coil method. So I rolled out a couple coils in advance. You see me scoring and slipping, putting the first coil on and mooshing it into place. And then I'm going to score and slip again, and I'm going to put a second coil on that's slightly offset so that it's further back towards the back of the head. So basically it's kind of like your ear. You've got that anterior piece that joins with your head, and then the main part of the ear isn't connected with the head and extends further back towards the back of your skull. And just like any kind of coil construction, I'm smoothing out or putting some pressure between the coils. And then I can go back in and do some of the details of the ear. I am not real up on my ear anatomy names apparently, but the little piece that is closer to your face and the sort of second ridge in there. I'm looking at my photos you see on the screen to see what an ear actually looks like. That's why reference photos are so helpful, because we all have ideas in our head about what we think things look like, and they don't necessarily really look like that. And then I'm just spending some time smoothing things out. Again, getting the forms essentially right, but not worrying about whether everything is perfect at this stage. We can always go back and add more. We can go back and carve things out. Just make sure you don't have anything that's really far off that you're going to have to cut off and completely redo. But there we go. We have at least half a face with the eyes, nose, and ears. This is the stage at which you hopefully will get to next class.